Thanks to Pedal for sponsoring a portion of this video. So I live and breathe smartphones, which is a very weird thing to say, but I love that world. Boy.
Nice. There's a lot we can learn.
To understand whey, there are graphs and they give you diet and lifestyle recommendations, and these improve your blood biomarkers. Another feature that Inside Tracker has that I really like is their inner age test. I actually helped develop it. This test shows you what your biological age is, how it compares to your chronological age, and what you can do to improve it. So if you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you should visit them at insidetracker.com/Sinclair, and you'll get 25% off any of their Inside Tracker plans. Use the code Sinclair, my last name, at the checkout. Today's episode is also brought to us by Levels. Levels is an app that syncs with a continuous glucose monitor, which they provide, and interprets your glucose data for you. I've been so impressed by Levels that I recently joined the company as an advisor. By monitoring your blood glucose, Levels allows you to see how different foods impact you. I've had a lot of fun running tests of my own, seeing how different foods impact my blood glucose levels. For example, I've learned that white rice and grapes really spike my blood sugar, whereas potatoes don't. As we've discussed on this podcast, having stable blood glucose is very important, not only for daily mental and physical energy, but also for long-term health. So if you would like to try Levels, you can skip the 150,000 person waitlist and jump the line to join today by going to levels.link/Sinclair. That's levels.link/Sinclair.
David, the research in this space is moving really fast right now. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard even for you to keep up with sometimes, right?
Well, it is. I read scientific papers even before I get out of bed. So I'm here to collate that and present it. But there's so many publications that come out every week that it's making my head spin. And the technology that's being developed, we can do 1 million experiments that each one used to take a year when I started in this field.
And so that's just allowing publications to just flourish right now in this area. It's allowing researchers to do a lot more work in a shorter amount of time. The result is that there's a lot to go through.
Well, there is, and it's coming out every week. And so the goal here is to keep everybody up to speed on what the latest discoveries, technology, and what they can apply to their lives as we're learning this almost on a daily basis.
And this is the Lifespan podcast, but if you haven't read Lifespan, it's okay, right? We're gonna get you up to speed. You should. If you haven't read Lifespan, you should read Lifespan. You don't have to pause the video right now, though.
Right. We're going to give everybody a primer on what's in Lifespan. And if you've read the book, great. We're going to go over the major topics so that everybody is with us as we go forward with these other 7 episodes.
And even if you've read the book, there's more information. I mean, it's been a couple of years since the book was published.
Oh, yeah. We're light years ahead of where we were in Lifespan. There's
in utero, an infant's age.
Yeah, in fact, when we're young, we're aging faster than when we're old. But we'll talk about that clock later. But what's important here is that we can improve our health and our long-term survival at any age. And we're going to talk about those lessons and what people can do at any age to improve their chances of being healthy later in life, as well as look good and function optimally now.
All right, there's a lot of misconceptions about what aging is. I think in no small part that comes from the conflation of aging with years lived. That makes sense for most of our human history because people got old when they were older, or at least as we conceptualize it, older. But the other thing that people have long assumed is that aging is inevitable. It's just going to happen to all of us. You have argued to me, and I think I believe you, this is not the case.
Right. In my lab now, we can control aging very precisely at will. We can speed it up as fast as we want in an animal and even reverse it. So aging is now controllable. We have the technology to control how fast we age. We can measure that, slow it down, and even reverse it. This has never happened in human history before. And one of the reasons that we're doing this today is to make sure everybody knows that this is coming, because it's going to fundamentally change the course of human history.
And this is something that perhaps shouldn't have come as such a shock to us, because in fact, if you look across the animal kingdom, there are all kinds of animals that age at different speeds, at different rates. Even though as we'll get into, the root source of aging is the same for everything. We age at different rates.
Well, we do, and sometimes I'm criticized because I've been on record. I am on record saying the first person to make it to 150 years of age has already been born, and people say, "How can you say that? What gives you confidence that we can even live 5 years longer?" Well, if we look at the animal kingdom, first of all, there are plenty of species that live that long. There is no reason why we can't do what they do, and if we learn how they do it, we can apply that to ourselves.
So one of these animals that I know you're sort of fascinated by right now. In fact, there's a picture of them on your computer screen right now. One of your children works on these.
Yeah.
Mole rats.
Alex, our oldest child, yeah. These naked mole rats, they're fascinating. They're weird looking. They've got sharp teeth and the rest of their body is long. It looks like a condom filled with walnuts, actually. Yeah, they're really weird. But what's exciting to work on them, and Vera Gorbanova is the professor that Alex works with, they found that these animals have particular traits biologically, molecularly, that allow them to live decades longer than a typical rodent, which mice live a bit over 2 years, rats over 4 years. But
these are similar animals, and one lives. How long does a mole rat live?
Over 30 years.
Over 30 years, and then normal rodents or other rodents, most rodents live a few, right?
Right, and what's important to realize is that there's a reason why that is. Animals that don't have a lot of predation, whales, mollusks, sharks, mole rats, underground, they don't get eaten, so they can put their energy into building a long-lasting body, and actually, as a consequence, they reproduce slowly as well. But what's important is that you can build a longer-lived body. And we can do that too. We can engineer ourselves. We can learn from these animals by studying what makes them live so long.
Well, you just named some of the pretty well-known sort of longevity species. Can we get into that? Can we talk about what makes each of these animals survive for so long?
Right. We can learn a lot. In fact, we should also talk about the bristlecone pine, which was a species you were going to look at when I first met you before we wrote the book.
I was in the White Mountains. Actually, the first time you called me ever, I was up on my way to go see the bristlecone pines in the White Mountains.
Right. And so these, how long do they live?
Like 5,000 years. It's absolutely amazing.
That's incredible. They were old when Jesus was born.
They were, yeah.
So what we can learn from those species is that you don't have to get old for
Okay, but there's a
years.
big difference between a bristlecone pine and a human being. Or a naked mole rat, for that matter. I mean, like, it's
Not
right?
really. No. We're all built from the same stuff. We've got DNA, proteins, RNA. We can engineer ourselves to be that long-lived. If we didn't have predation for the next 10 million years, we would live for centuries. We just don't have time to wait for evolution to take hold. We can engineer ourselves the way evolution would make us live longer.
One of the interesting things about bristlecone pines, and you see this if you go anywhere where these amazing, like, gnarly trees are, and they really are. I mean, like, they actually don't really even look like they're living a lot of times, and they live in these incredibly adverse environments. And that's characteristic of a lot of long-lived species. Is there a clue there?
Well, these species that don't have a lot of predation live a long time, but also in these extreme environments, they're turning on their body's defenses against aging. And we can do that to ourselves. It's a concept called hormesis, and again, we'll get to that in other episodes. But adversity, as long as it doesn't hurt your body, will make you healthier and live long.
Okay, and I do take your point that, I mean, there's vast similarities across all living organisms, but I do think also it's hard to make the argument that a tree is, something that we can learn from. But we don't need to even make that argument because there are these other organisms, right? From sort of like a bristlecone pine, which is a plant, to a sponge, which is an animal, to a mollusk, which is an animal, to a whale, which is a mammal. And we're getting closer and closer to humans. And across all of these categories, we've got organisms that have learned how to live a lot longer than we do.
Right. Well, we're essentially upright whales. That sounds crazy, but at the molecular level, if you look at the biochemistry, we're only separated by 40 million years, which is a blink of an eye in geological time. We actually could live as long as whales. There's not that much difference between us.
And a whale we know bowhead whales can live for hundreds of years, more than 200 years.
Right. Well, yeah, and they know that how?
They know that because, for a number of reasons. There's actually been some really cool studies on this, but one of the reasons is that they dated a harpoon that was stuck in a bowhead whale for 200 years. And the whale was still living when they pulled it out of the whale. Well, I think they whaled it, but...
Yeah, well, what's interesting is we now have the genome of these animals, and we can see that they have multiple copies of what we call longevity genes, some of which we discovered when I was in my 20s. These are genes that protect the body. Longevity genes actually get turned on by adversity, and there are ways we can tweak them. But whales naturally have multiple copies and higher levels of these longevity protective mechanisms, and the bristlecone pine has just whopping amounts. The problem...
And that's that connection that you're making there. You're like, oh, yeah. Look, we see this in a bristlecone pine, we see this in a whale, and oh, by the way, this gene also exists in humans.
Yeah, we're not that different from a banana, actually. Genomes are 40%.
You're not that different from a banana.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go there, Matt. But the important thing is that when you study other organisms, whether it's a banana or a yeast cell or a worm or a fly, we can learn lessons about biology, and especially about aging. We can learn more about aging from a yeast cell than we can about Alzheimer's or cancer.
This is why you're dismissive about people's dismissiveness about like only in mice. When people say, oh, we discovered this, and people go, oh, only in mice. But there's a lot we can learn from mice.
Well, we can. And aging is one of these universal things. And what really is remarkable that we've learned in my lab over the last 20 years is that the same genes that control aging in yeast work in worms and flies, mice, and even humans. That's a big deal. We didn't know that 30 years ago. Now we know that there's a fundamental set of genes that controls how fast we live, and then we can also exploit that to slow down our own aging now. And as we'll get to later, we can use that knowledge to even reverse the aging process.
We're talking about these genes. Let's name some of these genes.
Right. Well, so there are various categories. There are hundreds of longevity genes that are known, but they fall into three main buckets. The first one, it's called mTOR. It's a little m for mammal, and TOR, target of rapamycin. So mTOR is a longevity gene that makes a protein that senses amino acids. So when you eat a big steak, mTOR activity actually is activated, and mTOR now says, okay, I've got lots of protein, I'm gonna make muscle, I'm gonna burn energy. And that's why when you eat a steak, you build up muscle more than if you don't eat a lot of protein.
Is that a good thing?
No, it's actually not. What you want is to have mTOR levels low, to inhibit the mTOR. And when you have low mTOR activity, that's when you get the longest lifespan. Mice that are given a drug called rapamycin, which is used to suppress the immune system in patients, but you can take low doses as a human or give it in low doses to a mouse. Those mice live dramatically longer. Even if you give them rapamycin when they're 20 months of age, which is a really old mouse, that'd be like a 75-year-old human, they still live longer. So low activity of mTOR is a signal that times are tough. You don't have enough food. Hunker down, build a stronger body, survive, and the outcome of that is longer life for these mice. But it turns out it's not just for mice. You give rapamycin to a yeast cell or a fly or a worm, they also live longer. So you can tap in with these drugs into this universal longevity program, one of which is mTOR.
And so you have a long-term colleague who's been working on mTOR for a really long time. I know you're really impressed with their work.
I think you're referring to Matt Kaberlein?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's doing great work. His latest work that's fascinating is he's treating dogs with rapamycin and showing that it protects their heart. And he's also going to test their lifespan.
And we're seeing in dogs what we saw in yeast and mice, and the rapamycin works, this target of rapamycin, this gene, influenced in a certain way, works the same way across species.
Right, and that's why I think solving aging is going to be easier than solving cancer and heart disease, because aging is fundamentally conserved. We can make rapid progress extending the lifespan of little yeast cells, worms with chemicals, and then put them into humans, and hopefully we'll see they'll work the same way like rapamycin seems to do, and other molecules that we're going to get to in later episodes. But the point here is that aging is not that complicated once you understand the genes that control it, and then the fundamental causes of aging as well.
You just said genes that control it. So we talked about mTOR, but there are other genes that control it, and we're going to see similar things in each of these genes. What do you want to talk about next after mTOR?
Let's do bucket 2.
Okay.
Bucket 2 is AMPK. It's called AMP activated kinase. So what is AMPK?
It sounds like the name of a punk band.
That'd be a great name,
Ladies
actually.
and gentlemen, it's AMPK.
Yeah. And in this case, we don't want less of it, we want more of it. We want to activate. So how do you do that? You eat less, you fast, and that'll turn on AMPK. It'll do a few things. It'll make your body more sensitive to your insulin, suck the sugar out of your bloodstream, which can be toxic if it stays high. But it also ramps up the energy producing centers of the body, these membrane filled bags, which are actually ancient bacteria living in our bodies called mitochondria.
Who's doing the cool work in AMPK? Who's doing the cool work in AMPK right now?
Well, it's been studied by thousands of labs, but the one that's most interesting, I think, right now is to see if a drug that activates AMPK extends human lifespan, slows down aging. And that's Nir Barzilai, my good friend down in New York at Albert Einstein College of Medicine.
And the drug is metformin, which is most people would know as a diabetes drug.
Yeah, metformin's really interesting because it's super safe. It's one of the safest drugs ever known. It's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines for humanity. In much of the world, it's costs pennies and you can get it over the counter.
They're paying you to take it.
Essentially, they want it. In those countries, they just want you to have it like aspirin. In the US and a lot of English-speaking countries and Europe, you need a prescription for this drug. And it's the frontline therapy for type 2 diabetes or high blood sugar.
And there is an active ongoing human trial of metformin called Targeting Aging with Metformin, right? The TAME study.
Study, yeah.
Yeah.
So why do we think that metformin actually works? Well, first is my lab in collaboration with Rafael De Cabo down at the National Institute on Aging, showed in a mouse study that if you give them metformin, those mice are healthier and live longer. Again, doesn't prove that it works in humans, but you can take tens of thousands, and people have taken tens of thousands of people who are on metformin for type 2 diabetes and looked at their overall health and their lifespan. And this fact that I'll tell you blows my mind. Type 2 diabetics that go on metformin, on average, live longer than people that don't have type 2 diabetes. And they're protected against diseases. So if you're susceptible to cancer or heart disease, frailty, those on metformin reduce their risk of those diseases, whereas those that don't take metformin, it increases over time.
Okay, why does Nir think that this is happening? Like at the molecular level, what's going on?
Well, AMPK is a sensor of energy, and low energy is a good thing for longevity. It's one of the reasons I fast. We'll get into that in a future episode. But AMPK is central to sensing low energy, and in response, it protects the body because it's thinking we're going to run out of food. So this is another evidence of this term hormesis, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And AMPK sits as a central regulator of the body's defenses. It will downregulate mTOR, it will activate other longevity genes, and that's really important.
These genes are working in concert with one another.
That's a really important concept because about a decade ago, scientists like me, we were fighting over whose longevity gene was more important. It was pretty pathetic. And then,
and very typical of scientists.
Right, everyone wants to be, the smartest person in the room. But what we finally realized 10 years ago is that these genes talk to each other and they're part of a network, which actually is a blessing and a curse because you can tweak one and affect the others. But now we're faced with, now what? Which one is best to tweak? And if you tweak 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3, is that good or is it bad? And that we'll get to also in later episodes.
Well, and okay, so and if you said 3 now, so I'm hearing some similar things though, and I think this is really important. One of which is that these genes are activated by stress. mTOR is, gosh darn it, AMPK is, and the gene that you work on, that you've been working on for a really long time, is as well.
Well, it's a family of genes. We have 7 of these, what we call sirtuins. And we linked them to aging when I was a postdoc at MIT back in the 1990s. And what we were looking at as a group was what can make yeast cells live longer. And there was one mutation that led us to a gene called SIR2, SIR2, which stands for Silent Information Regulator number 2. And information is the key. We'll get to that later. But this set of sirtuin genes, this family, has been shown in yeast and worms and flies, mice, and now humans to be a really important central regulator of longevity. We showed, now going back to 2005, that fasting activates the sirtuins, and later we showed exercise activates these genes. So a lot of the things that we're told by doctors to do to live longer and be healthier, we think acts through the sirtuins in concert with these other two sets of genes we just talked about.
You know what I really appreciate about this, because I think there's a lot of like bagging on doctors right now. It's like they never tell us the same thing, but they've always told us diet and exercise. And maybe like the individualized advice is a little different, or maybe it's shifted a little bit, but it's like eat better, work out. And that's what helps activate the sirtuins to do what they do.
Yeah, and it's an important concept because most people think, oh, when you run, your blood flows and clears out your arteries, and when you eat less, it's just good for you.
But that's not what's happening.
Well, right. What we've discovered is that these longevity genes, these three sets we've just mentioned, need to be either downregulated or upregulated in a